Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Dill, it is post-spring portal, post-spring practice. The month of May is kind of meant for calling your shot. Texas being the number one team in the country for us both, I don't know if it's necessarily the hottest take in the world, but Dill, we felt this way in the month of January too. The last couple of months has only made my opinion stronger, specifically with what Texas did in the spring portal window, where you feel like they shored up the last remaining question marks around this football team heading into 2025. Now, look, I get it. I'm on Twitter. I'm on the message boards. Some of y'all feeding us it in terms of projecting too much with this Texas football team. We haven't seen Arch Manning play that much. How can you buy stock in Texas going into 2025? The first thing I'll say is look at a lot of the other top teams across the country, like Oregon with Dante Moore, Ohio State with Julian Saint. We're projecting with a lot of the better teams across the sport. I look at this Texas football team, Dill, the difference between Texas in 2024 and in 2025 is their ceiling as a football team is higher. It's actually funny because I had the same exact conversation with Oregon a couple of days ago where go back to 2024, Texas playing their A football versus Ohio State's A football. Like Ohio State was just the team that had the highest ceiling. And if they played their best football in the college football playoffs, which they did, there wasn't really a team that could beat them. Going into 2025, you look at this Texas team and say their best football, especially with Arch Manning at quarterback, who offers a significantly higher ceiling than Quinn Ewers, their best football is going to be good enough to go out and win a national championship. Why am I saying that? Because of what Coach Sark has done building this roster. I mean, elite on the recruiting trail, elite supplementing in the transfer portal. The ceiling of this roster in general going into 2025, it's just a higher ceiling than what we saw in 2024. Now, yes, they are 103rd in returning production. There's a decent amount of projection that needs to take place here. But if this team comes together and there's not that many questions about this football team, it's going to be very hard to beat them every single Saturday. Now, want to get into what I would say is a few specific things about this football team that's a little bit different than 2024. Now, before we get into it, as always, y'all let it fly in the comment section. Specifically, the Texas Longhorn fans would love to hear the expectations. Look, I don't say this about a lot of teams. The way I look at this roster in front of us, it's national championship or bust, in my opinion, going into 2025. And I kind of envision that being the next 5 to 10 years with Coach Sark in Texas. Appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Dill, on the offensive side of the football, there's a couple of hot takes that I have. I'm going to start it off with not that hot of a take. They're going to be able to run the football better against elite teams. Texas was able to run the football against some of the bottom teams in the SEC, against most teams in the country, quite frankly. But when they got to a team like Ohio State that had an elite front seven, especially when you're talking about a quarterback in Quinn Ewers that really cannot provide much value with his legs, they struggled to run the football. You go into 2025, yes, I get it. You might have some question marks about the offensive line. We'll get to that. Arch Manning, legitimate threat as an athlete. That's not to say they're going to run him 20 times a game, but he's a guy that can pull it in that read option look. And then you get your running backs back healthy, specifically a guy like CJ Baxter. Running the football, the failure to run the football, you could argue kind of cost Texas against Ohio State in that college football playoff game. Going into 2025, they'll have, at least in my opinion, more success running the football against the elite defenses that they'll see in the playoffs.
And CJ Baxter is the one for me that I feel
Yes.
like people are sleeping on. Like, I think we all know Arch Manning's going to come in and be a threat with his legs and just add a new dimension to this rushing attack. But CJ Baxter being out, I mean, he is the guy on this running back room. And then I think, like, when you get into the depth, like, Jarrett Gibson and Contravian Wiseman will probably be kind of similar in terms of their snap count. That'd be my guess. And again,
I like Jarrett Gibson a lot. I'm just throwing that out there.
I like Jarrett Gibson too, but I do kind of look if CJ Baxter gets back and takes his jump from his freshman year, he's the guy on this team. So again,
100%.
even I know people like, okay, it's not always about the run. I mean, when you have a really good running back in college football, it's different than the NFL. Like college football running backs who are premier, if you will, can put
Yeah.
a much bigger imprint on in that in
Go
sport.
to Ohio State with Judkins and Travion Henderson. Like they made game-changing plays that allowed Ohio State to win not only the football game against Texas, but really all year long for Ohio State. Wisner was good. He wasn't great. CJ, and that's not a shot at Wisner. It's just, would you consider him a top 5 running back in the country? You look at CJ Baxter, assuming he kind of gets back healthy and takes that step, he has the opportunity to be great, to be one of the best backs that we see in the country. That matters. And you combine that with Arch Manning. Dill, here's the question, and I know you've spent a lot of time banging the table for this Texas offensive line. Like, that's obviously a massive storyline when you talk about running the football. How are we feeling about it replacing the production that they're going to need to replace?
And that almost feels like not disingenuous, but like we kind of know about 3 guys on this offensive line, which is
I
frankly
kind
a
of
lot
agree.
more than like you can say. Like when Trevor Gooseby got his shots to play, he
He's
was a
great.
monster. He was really, really good in those games, playing against good teams like Georgia, obviously. And then you look again, it goes back to what Sarkisian's built at Texas in that ability to develop or recruit at a high level, retain at a high level, and develop at a high level. You don't see a ton of red on this list. And that's just kind of saying there's not a ton of transfer portal guys. That's exactly how you want it. Texas has shown if they think they need a position in the portal, they'll go out and get it. In the spring, they just took the 2 best kids, it felt like, at the 2 positions they wanted. We want Murad Watson. We're getting Murad Watson. So if they want an offensive lineman, I think they would have added. I just don't think they need to because of what Sarkisian's been able to build with this team.
And Jack and Drea should be highlighted in red. That's my fault. Their roster building approach, I think, is the best in the country. And I don't even know if it's really all that close. Like they build this roster at the high school ranks. They don't lose a lot of guys. They don't want to lose in the portal. And then they'll just go to the transfer portal for the reason it's meant to be there. Like, just go fill in your cracks. You look at some teams bringing in 30 new players a year in the portal. Those are the teams that kind of peter out and don't really make it happen at the national championship level. They do and they did it last year too, like adding guys like Andrew Makuba. It's not going to be 20 new players coming in, but it's going to be the quantity is going to be small, but the quality of players really high. But more importantly, it's really targeted. It's always at the positions they need to address. The roster building is very, very impressive. And like you said, with the offensive line, we have the same conversation that we had with LSU. Like, LSU recruits that position well, they develop it well. They didn't, I mean, even Texas didn't go in and get a single offensive lineman in the portal. Like, that
Now, the
tells you.
one thing you're probably looking at is tackle depth because I mean, you probably
Yeah, I
fourth
agree.
guy is probably Nick Brooks. I imagine Andre Kojo will be that kind of swing guy up next, and you feel really good, I think, about what he can do. But that depth is probably the one question. So again, if they can just
Yeah,
stay healthy and be like, they'll be a really, really good unit. But that
agreed.
again, you're kind of poking or trying to poke holes in Texas roster, which is hard because they're about as complete as it comes. It feels like tackle depth is probably the one thing you're looking at. Like, well, if we go
Is
down
it good
2
enough? Yeah.
tackles,
Yeah. Especially when especially when you're going late in the season, right? Because you look at Ohio State, they had to go into their depth a little bit. Notre Dame had to go into their depth a little bit. You hope you don't need to. Even Texas had to. I mean, Trevor Gooseby had to play some big time snaps for Texas down the stretch. You hope you don't have to go into your depth too much, but you also kind of trust that Texas might have the depth to make it happen. Here's the hot take here. And again, is the hot take Arch Manning raising the ceiling of this offense, like with his creative playmaking abilities, probably the best way to describe it. Dale, I went back and watched that Ohio State game again. The lack of playmaking ability in big time moments that Quinn Ewers just didn't have, it felt like it cost him a little bit. Like, Arch Manning's going to have that, or ideally he's going to have that for Texas in 2025. Here's the hot take: is the wide receiver room better? Now, I think there's people looking at me saying, "Are you out of your mind losing a guy like Matt Golden? How can you make that case?" I think Ryan Wingo is going to be a top 10 wide receiver in the country, maybe even top 5. Then you look at DeAndre Moore, played a massive role for Texas down the stretch. Parker Livingston has been generating a ton of buzz coming out of spring. You have 2 5-star freshmen coming in who that's 3 with Michael Terry. You have multiple high-end guys coming in as true freshmen who you expect to play too. I know you lose a really good player in Matt Golden, and to a lesser extent, a guy like Isaiah Bond. I think Ryan Wingo might be a better version of any wide receiver that Texas had in the 2024 year.
And then the big thing is Isaiah Bond just disappointed last year. He didn't
Yeah,
play
yeah,
well enough. It
100%.
felt like they wanted to run the offense through him for like the first part of the year. I think you just have a little bit more definition. You kind of know where guys fit into this. I mean, Ryan Wingo's kind of your number one do it all kind of guy.
Yeah.
DeAndre Moore, obviously elite in the slot. And then Parker Livingston, you hope he can give you some of that game breaking ability to get down the field and kind of spread things out. So I think, again, you look, the depth is good, especially because I kind of trust young wide receivers. That's like one of those positions I don't look. If you have enough talent, you can be young at wide receiver.
Yeah.
I don't
Well,
need
Coach Sark doesn't always. Coach Sark will sometimes put a leash on some of the young freshman wide receivers because he kind of did it a little bit with Ryan Wingo, and at least in my opinion.
Yeah, I wanted more.
I wonder if he lets the leash off guys like Khalil Lockett and Jamie French because I do think they're probably ready to play at a high level in 2025. To me, it's what I love most about Ryan Wingo. He's so complete. There's nothing he can't do. He's a big body that goes well below sub 11 in the 100-meter dash. Elite with the football in his hands. I'm looking for them to give him more opportunities in space because when he has the football in space, he has the ability to change a game. That's kind of what you hoped you got from Isaiah Bond last year. You just didn't get it. I think Ryan Wingo can give you that. And then Jack Andreas, what a pull in the portal. One of the best tight ends in the country coming to Texas. This offensive ceiling is very, very high. And again, you're projecting with Arch Manning 2 years cooking in Coach Sark's offense with the talent that he's going to have around him. It's hard not to bet on Arch Manning going into 2025. Defense. I feel like people are starting to come around with it, Dill. You know what I mean? In terms of what this defense has been and really is one of the best defenses in the country. It really was last year. What I guess let's start with this. Can the pass rush go from really, really good to elite in 2025 is probably the thing I'm looking for. And I'm not saying it was bad last year. You sacked the quarterback, 8.7% of the time. That was 22nd in the country. Can that be top 5 in the country this year? That's probably the question that I'll put in your lap right now.
And that's probably the Colin Simmons question because really, if they're going to be elite, he was like awesome last year. I'm
Yes.
not trying to say he wasn't like good or something. He was clearly really good.
Pretty
Can
damn
he be
good.
like a top 10 player overall? Like just be one of those to like just be that
Yeah.
good. That's probably the thing that pushes them over the edge. And then Trey Moore is kind of the interesting one because you're kind of like, I think I know how they're going to use him, or at least it feels like it. I
Yeah,
don't think
I
he's going to
agree.
be like a true like off ball
You
linebacker all the time. You
you
have to
can't.
have him rushing off
Yeah.
the edge, but I do think they're going to try to get him with good matchups and like just kind of use him as like a utility blitzer of sorts.
Chess
I
piece,
feel
yeah.
like that feels like what they're going to do, but he's got to be rushing the passer. He's too skilled at it to not be.
The edge room is going to be just fine. To me, the question is, can you replace the pass rush production that you had on the inside of the defensive line? I don't think Cole Brevard is going to give you that. I think they brought in Cole Brevard for kind of one reason. That's to be a two-gapper beast against the run. I think Travis Shaw has some pass rush upside. Is he going to give that to you in 2025? I'm not banking on it. You know what I mean? Because we've seen a decent amount of Travis Shaw and we haven't seen it just yet. I think he'll be a very capable rotational body, but I'm not banking on him being elite. The guy I'm looking at is Murad Watson. He was awesome as a freshman at Syracuse, specifically against the run. In the pass rush, he didn't really know what he was doing. Like he was just a really talented big body freshman that was a bull in the china shop. Coming into Texas, and it has to be quick, right? It has to be quick. He's only going to get fall camp. Can he turn into the pass rush force that we've seen from Texas over the last couple of years on the middle of that defensive line? I don't know if it's a huge storyline because if you just have your big bodies in the middle of the defensive line be good against the run, I think you can rely on Colin Simmons and Trey Moore and Ethan Burke and even a guy like Anthony Hill to dial it up in the pass rush. But can Murad Watson be one of the better pass rushers in the country from the inside? It's not something we've seen from him yet. But unlike a guy like Cole Brevard, I think the opportunity, the potential is certainly there with this kid in
And it'd
2025.
probably be him in January because
Yeah.
January has the athleticism and like the skill set, I think, to be very good. Now, is he like like big time SEC strong and
We'll
like
see.
have that yet in his game. Like that'll be a big one. But he's a guy who,
Oh, he
again, you
played
go back
well.
to the spring game last year and some of the things you got to see in his like sparing snaps at the end of games. There's something there, I think,
I
with him.
agree.
And again, maybe not physically ready last year to be particularly dominant, but he's a guy who I'd be looking for a big step because he gives you that playmaking ability that a guy like Cole Brevard or Travis Shaw or Hero Kanu probably doesn't give you.
And Hirokano is an interesting one too. I'm putting him in the 3 deep right now. That he was a guy that grew up in Europe, moved to the United States. He knew it was going to take a little bit longer. Is he a guy that can like flip that freaking light bulb on and be a dude? All right. Here's the thing that allowed Texas to have a shot at beating Ohio State. Really, the only team in the college football playoffs that made Ohio State really sweat. I think is probably fair to say. Why were they able to do that? Because they had the dudes in the back end. Like what made Oregon just get smoked in the Rose Bowl? They didn't have the size and speed to run with Ohio State. Texas does. And that is something that you need when you want to win a national championship. Because look at the teams you're going to have to beat. You're going to have to run with Jeremiah Smith. You're going to have to run with guys like Carnell Tate. Look at Oregon. You're going to have to run with Evan Stewart, run with DeCorian Moore. There are just not a lot of teams that have recruited the defensive backfield well enough to have the athletic profiles to do that. Texas does in a big time way. They've just recruited 6 foot plus guys with sub 11s. We said that the same thing with Oregon. Oregon's done that too. The thing that stands out to me, what I love about Texas secondary is one, that the coaching has been freaking elite there. Secondly, is the continuity. Like very same thing we said with the offensive line. Look at the secondary. They lost one of the best defensive backs that we saw in the country last year in Jahdae Barron. They didn't go to the portal for anybody because they know they have guys in the back end. I think the secondary has a chance to be really, really good. And when you talk about knocking off a team like Ohio State week 1 or beating a team like Oregon in the college football playoffs, they have the pieces in the back end to run with the best teams in the country.
And you said it in terms of the secondary development. Like you go back to 2023 year and how maybe they struggled at times
Sucked.
against good teams
Yeah.
in the secondary where they like Washington really just kind of threw it
Yeah.
around on them. Oklahoma threw it around on them a little bit. Like their step from 23 to 24 was so
Huge.
big. And again, you kind of said it as much as like you're losing 2 really good players in Makuba and obviously Jade, but you're getting back 4 guys in McDonald, Taft, Gilbo, and Muhammad who have all played a ton of football. So again, as much as like, yeah, you're losing 2 really good players, it's a really experienced, really interesting like unit that has a lot of continuity. Now, I'm still interested to see what they do with Jalen Gilbo, if like they keep him at cornerback or
Hey,
if they
it works for Jahdae Barron. You know what I mean? And like, I kind of like, to me, I was surprised too. Like, it made me raise my eyebrows. And then I was like, well, it worked really well for them last year. I'll probably just trust this staff
and
because
that, but that's like because Jelani McDonald can play the star pretty well, and you obviously have some
Jonah
good
Williams will
cornerback
be
or
able to too.
safeties, I should say, waiting in
Yeah.
the wings. Like Derek Williams is a good
Yeah.
player in my opinion. So it'll be interesting. Like this is probably one that I still don't think is totally finalized for Texas. I just think you're versatile enough, you're talented enough, you have a lot of like interesting battles going on, and getting your best 5 on is. I mean, that's the goal. So
Yeah, and it's
I'd be
pretty
interested to see
freaking
what they
easy
cut
to
up.
do when you have guys like Jelani McDonald or a guy like Jonah Williams. Like they can do anything you want on the back end. So getting your best 5 is not a problem for this Texas secondary. And that's the thing is like we want to make sure it's maximized as much as you want to win that football game in Columbus week 1. You want to be playing your best football in the months of December and January. I think that's what Texas is going to work up to do. And I think this team is poised to do that. You know, you look at a team like Oregon, it felt like they just kind of ran out of gas. I feel like this Texas team probably only gets better as the season goes on because it's really deep on the defense side of the football. I don't know. It's the team that checks the most. This is probably, I mean, we could have made this episode 30 seconds. It's the team that probably checks the most boxes and also has one of the highest ceilings in the country. That's why they're our number 1 team going into 2025. Fire me up for Texas. Feels like Coach Sark's been like knocking on the door for the last couple of years. I feel like he's gonna kick that sucker down in 2025. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. We'll talk to y'all later.